said that Father Time is undefeated, and for my money, just as an impeccable record is his cousin Death. At some point in our lives, the Grim Reaper is going to come for all of us. There's no avoiding it. He'll just sneak up on you. Nobody knows that fact better than the people on this list that I've compiled this week. I just want to put it out there. I'm not making fun of these people for dying, but you do have to admit that their deaths are dripping with irony. Also, because of some very smart purchases I've made, I'm no longer afraid of the Grim Reaper. He's not sneaking up on me because I have eyes in the back of my head. And also, now that I'm seeing it, I think I look a little bit like Fred Durst.
Here we go.
So Samuel Clemens, better known as Mark Twain, was one extraordinary guy and an amazing writer, with famous quotes like, "Why do tomorrow what you can put off until the day after tomorrow?" And clothes do make the man because naked people have no effect on society whatsoever. The guy was pretty funny.
Do you know how easy this is for me?
There's two notable things about his life. At one point, he was reported to be dead by a newspaper, to which he thought it would be fun to say, "Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated." Pretty funny guy, right?
Didn't you make that joke the other day?
The irony in his death comes from when he was born, Halley's Comet was passing the Earth. And reportedly, for the rest of his life, he said, "I will go out when Halley's Comet leaves." And true to his word, I don't know if he planned it or not, on April 21st of 1910, the world lost a great author when Mark Twain unfortunately died of a heart attack, and 1910 was once again a year when Halley's Comet was passing by the Earth. Talk about irony, right? So if you don't know Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and James Monroe, all I need you to know, if you don't already, is that they signed the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. That's it. Just stay with me.
All right.
Now, considering that they were revered for what they did on this monumental day, it's a little ironic, I'll say creepy, the fact that it was also the day that they died, too.
How could this day get any worse?
In 1831, July 4th, James Monroe died. If you want to double down and go even creepier and more ironic, both Thomas Jefferson and John Adams died 50 years after signing the Declaration of Independence, obviously on the same day. And what I still think is the most ironic part about it is that when John Adams was dying, good old Johnny Adams, his last words were reported to be, "While I'm dying, Thomas Jefferson still lives." Little did he know that Thomas Jefferson had actually died 5 hours before him, but word was not going to reach for about a week or two. Good time to have a cell phone. Fortunately, he didn't.
Thanks, Captain Obvious.
So if you're my age or from my generation, you've probably never heard of or you're not a big fan of Sam Kinison.
I don't know who this man is.
Let me fill you in. He was a famous stand-up comedian in the 1980s, known for yelling on stage. That was his gimmick.
Turns out he was using performance enhancers.
In one of his more popular bits, Kinison actually jokingly defended drunk driving, saying that people who drove drunk didn't actually want to be driving drunk, but it was the only way to get their car from point A to point B, which was home, after a night of drinking.
Just some people didn't get it. It's not okay.
The irony in this story comes from the fact that April 10th, 1992, Kinison was actually driving when his car was hit and he died in a car accident caused by, you guessed it, a drunk driver.
That is so not funny.
If you don't know Madame Curie, you either have never seen The Big Bang Theory
Bazinga!
or you slept through science class. A Polish-born physicist and chemist, she broke down barriers for both men and women alike in her fields. The first female recipient of a Nobel Prize ever, the first person to win 2 Nobel Prizes, and the first person to win a Nobel Prize for 2 different disciplines under the same category of science.
I wake up in the morning, I piss excellence.
Needless to say, she was a real rock star in the scientific community. Also discovering radium and plutonium, which actually helped her win a Nobel Prize. Unfortunately, in 1934, she died of an aplastic anemia, which, as you might guess, was most likely caused by prolonged exposure to radioactive materials.
Why, God, why?
Marcus Garvey was a Jamaican-born political activist who did a lot for the African American community. He was the founder of the United Negro Improvement Association, along with the African Communities League. And at one point, he actually appointed himself the Provisional President of Africa, despite having never been there.
Yes, this is perfect.
Later in his life, when he was living in England, Garvey actually suffered a stroke, which was reported by a Chicago-based newspaper to actually be his death.
Big mistake. Big. Huge.
And one day, Marcus Garvey happened to be reading that said newspaper
I like to break a mental sweat.
and actually read his own obituary, which was rather scathing, saying that no one really cared for him anymore and that he was living in squalor. Apparently the shock from seeing his own obituary, compounded with the fact that he was just being raked over the coals by this journalist, was enough to give Garvey so much stress it caused him a second stroke and eventually led to his death. I used to work with older people who always said they would read the obituaries to make sure they weren't in them. I thought they were joking. Turns out it can actually happen.
I don't like that guy.
So they're not everyone's cup of tea, but I personally love the Beach Boys. Known for their classic typical surfer feel music, it was very upbeat and positive. Unfortunately, this next segment isn't.
You're a bigger buzzkill than Buzz Killington.
Dennis Wilson was one of the three brothers who founded the Beach Boys, along with a friend of theirs. Of all the members in the group, Wilson was the only one who was actually a professed surfer.
Figure it out there. Let's go surfing. Come on.
Which makes it that much sadder that in Marina del Rey,
Of course, in German means a whale's vagina.
he actually dove overboard for his wife's possessions while they were having a small party on a yacht and never resurfaced, with his body actually washing up in a harbor a few miles away. So for this one, the only real Beach Boy in the group actually died of drowning.
Thinks he's funny, but I'm so not amused.
So Jim Heselden is a pretty feel-good story, at least in the beginning. Starting out as a coal miner, he eventually worked his way up to being an entrepreneur,
I mean, come on, guys, that's pretty cool, right?
buying Segway Incorporated in 2010. However, while enjoying his success, one day when he was riding his Segway on a mountain trail, he actually saw a dog walker up ahead and decided to wheel backwards off the trail to make room for the said dog walker.
Backing up!
Unfortunately, he must have gone a little too far because from the dog walker's story, he basically just saw him roll backwards and then he didn't see him anymore. And unfortunately, Jim Heselden died riding on the invention of a company he had just recently purchased.
You are no comedian.
Clement Poole is probably one of the most ironic deaths in history. A politician from Ohio and a lawyer during the Civil War, he was also the leader of the Democratic Copperhead faction.
I hate snakes!
When he was taking a case defending Thomas McGann, who was on trial for murder because it was proposed that he had shot a man during a barroom brawl, Clement's case to defend his client was that the man he had shot had actually shot himself and that Thomas McGee had never actually fired a single round.
Are you serious?
While running tests of the gun, he had not emptied what he had been testing and mistakenly grabbed a loaded gun when he was showing some of his contemporaries his theory. Withdrawing the gun from his waistband, it actually went off, hitting him in the gut and mortally wounding him. As he cried out, "Oh no, I've been shot." Unfortunately, 12 hours later, Clement died of his self-inflicted wounds.
It's quite all right. I've grown tired of living.
The silver lining in the story, if you will, is that he actually did get his man acquitted because, as he had proved, it's not that hard to shoot yourself with a gun.
You're funny!
Bobby Leach was an English-born daredevil whose most notable claim was being the second person in history to go over Niagara Falls and live. The stunt itself earned him 2 broken kneecaps, a fractured jaw, and a litany of other injuries,
How are you not dead?
which landed him in the hospital for 6 months before he could actually leave and was healthy. So after showing Niagara Falls who's boss, there's really nothing that can harm this guy, right? Till he was 68 when he slipped on an orange peel, which led to an injury in his leg, resulting in gangrene and finally leading to amputation. After the amputation, he died 2 months later from complications of the amputation.
Hey, that rhymes.
So, in an ironic twist, the guy who conquered Niagara Falls was actually taken out by nothing more than an orange peel. Troy Leon Gregg with 2 G's if it matters,
Nobody cares.
was a death row inmate in the state of Georgia who was sentenced to death on July 29, 1980, for murdering 2 men whilst he was hitchhiking through the state.
I didn't find out what gay meant till I started hitchhiking.
Gregg went so far as to appeal to the Supreme Court that his sentence was actually considered cruel and unusual. However, he was denied. Not wanting to take this lying down, though, on July 28th, Gregg actually decided, with the help of 2 other inmates, to escape the prison and go on the lam. Successfully escaping, all 3 men made it to North Carolina, where one night at a bar, Gregg got a little too handsy with a waitress after drinking, and wound up getting into a scrap with a bunch of bikers from the local area, who wound up stabbing, murdering, and then dumping his body in a nearby lake. So if you're keeping track at home, he broke out the day before, and most likely wound up dying on the same exact day he was sentenced to execution anyway. Talk about taking the long way to get to the same exact place.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard.
Alright guys, that's it for this week's list. Hope you found it a small part entertaining, small part interesting. That's what I'm here to do. I encourage you to subscribe if you're picking up what I'm putting down. New videos every week. Right now it's just on Mondays. Pretty soon it'll be Fridays too. Don't be afraid to look at other videos that I put up in the past. Don't be afraid to do a deep dive. Make me feel good, make you feel good. Until next week, make sure to shine on all you crazy diamonds, and I'll see you next Monday.